Hello and welcome to the next edition of the HP Discover podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArmor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on IT innovation and how it's making an impact on people's lives. Our next DevOps thought leadership discussion explores how continuous processes around the development and deployment of applications is both impacted by and a benefit to the Internet of Things trend. Here to help us better understand the relationship between DevOps and a plethora of end devices, I am delighted to have with us Gary Groover, a consultant, author, and former IT executive who has led large-scale IT transformation projects. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
We're also here with John Jeremiah, technology evangelist at HP Software. Welcome, John.
Hi, Dana. Thanks to be here.
Well, let's talk about how the DevOps trend extends not to just traditional enterprise IT and software applications, but perhaps to a much larger set of applications, those in the embedded space, mobile, end devices of all sorts. So, Gary, why is perhaps DevOps even more important when you have so many different moving parts, as we expect in the Internet of Things, than perhaps a bit more concise and constrained enterprise legacy IT environment?
You know, it's software development, and everybody needs to be more productive with software development. And software is no longer just on websites or in the IT department. It's gone everywhere in the industry. It's gone to every product, every place. And being able to differentiate your product with software is becoming more and more important to everybody.
John, is this a sense that, from your perspective, that DevOps is more impactful, more powerful when we apply it to the Internet of Things?
I do. I mean, because the reality is that Internet of Things is moving as fast as mobile is, and even faster. And if you don't have the ability to change your software, to evolve, to iterate as there's new business innovation, well, then you're not going to be able to keep up and be competitive. So Internet of Things is going to require a DevOps approach in order to be successful.
And perhaps in the past, we've had a separate development organization and approach to devices and embedded. Do we need to still do that, or can we combine traditional enterprise software with DevOps and perhaps apply the same systems, architecture, and technologies to all sorts of development?
To some sort, I think the principles of being able to keep your code base more releasable and work on a prioritized backlog and work through the process of adding automated testing and frequent feedback to the developers to where they get much better at it all applies. There are some unique things when you get into embedded. You know, for example, when you've got a website or something like that, it's pretty easy to spin up a bunch of environments and do automated testing. When you get into embedded systems, you can't do that. You just can't afford to have the final product. It's usually not ready and affordable. A lot of times you'll have a custom ASIC. You need to do testing on that. As much as possible, the software characteristics of the product, you want to be able to put in a simulator and have a simulator that you can use and trust to find defects, because the amount of automated testing you're going to need to be running to transform your business is huge. If you don't have an affordable place to run that, it doesn't work. If you have custom ASICs, you're going to need to create an emulator to do that. And what I see is way too many organizations that are embedded, that are trying to transform the process, have given up on using simulators and emulators because they find that they're not finding the defects that they want to, but they haven't invested in bringing those up to scale so they can be effective. And I think one of the first things I talk to people about that have embedded systems is you're not going to be successfully transforming your business until you create simulators and emulators that you can trust as a test environment to be finding defects.
So the need to test often doesn't go away. It perhaps is more important as you compress your development cycles and you work with an operations mentality.
Yeah, you know, at HP, we were running 15,000 hours of testing on the code base every day. When it was manual, we couldn't do that, and we really couldn't transform our business until we fundamentally put that level of automated testing in place. And, you know, for laser printer testing, there's no way we would have been able to have enough paper to run that many hours of testing, and you would have worn out printers. There weren't enough trees in Idaho to build enough paper to do that testing on the final product. So you need to drive it upstream as much as you possibly can to give rapid feedback to your developers.
All right, well, let's tell our listeners and readers a bit about an example that I think you're alluding to. That's a firmware project for HP printers. Tell us why DevOps helped in that project and how that perhaps illustrates where DevOps and embedded development come together in the future.
So I had an opportunity to take over leading the LaserJet firmware organization in about 2007. It'd been the bottleneck for the organization for 2 decades. We couldn't add a new product to our plans without checking the firmware, and marketing about giving up asking for new features. 2008 hits, and we were forced to cut our spending, as a lot of people out in the industry were at that time, because revenues weren't going very well. And we could no longer try to spend our way out of a problem, so we had to engineer a solution. And so we were fundamentally looking for anything that we could do to improve productivity. We went after that. We went on a journey of what I would call applying Agile and DevOps principles at scale, as opposed to trying to scale small teams in the organization. And we went through this process of continually trying to improve with a group of 400 to 800 engineers and working through that process. At the end of 3 years, firmware was no longer the bottleneck. We'd gone from 5% of our capacity going to innovation to 40%. And we were supporting 140% more products. So we took something that was a bottleneck for the business and completely unleashed that capability and fundamentally transformed the business. The details are captured in my first book, A Practical Approach to Large-Scale Agile Development. It's available at all your finest bookstores.
And how does this provide a harbinger of things to come? What you've done with firmware at HP and laser printers several years ago, how does that paint a picture for where DevOps can be powerful and beneficial in the larger Internet of Things environment?
Well, if the Internet of Things is going to move so fast and nobody knows exactly what they need and what capabilities and where it is, the ability to move fast, at HP we went 2 to 3 times faster than we ever thought possible. And I think what you're seeing as DevOps is the unicorns of the world are showing that software development can go much faster than anybody ever thought was possible before. That's going to be much more important as you're trying to understand how this market evolves and what capabilities customers want and where they want them on the Internet of Things. And I think the companies that can move fast and respond to the feedback from the customers are going to be the ones that win.
Now, John, we've seen sort of a dip in the complexity around mobile devices in particular when people consolidated around iOS and Android after having had many targets, at least for a software platform in the past. That may have given people a sense of solace or complacency that they can develop applications rapidly. But I think we're also now getting to Gary's point, to a place where we don't really know what sort of endpoints we're going to be dealing with. We're looking at automated cars, houses, drones, appliances, even sensors within our own bodies. What are some of the core principles we need to keep in mind to allow for the rapid and continuous development processes to improve, but without stumbling again as we hit perhaps the complexity when it comes to targets?
Well, I think one of the first things that you're going to have to do, and we're going to have to embrace, is virtualization and strategies in order to quickly virtualize new technologies and to quickly be able to simulate those technologies when they come into life. We don't know exactly what they're going to be, but we have to be able to embrace that and to bring that into our processes and methodology. And as Gary was talking about earlier, the strategies of going fast that apply in firmware apply in the enterprise as well, about building in automated testing, failing as fast as you can, and learning as you go. And as we see complexity increase, the real key is going to be able to harness that and use virtualization as a strategy to move that forward.
Any other metrics of success? How do we know we're succeeding with DevOps? So we've talked about speed. We've talked about testing early and often. How do you know you're doing this well? And for organizations that want to have a good, way to demonstrate success, how do they present that?
I wouldn't even start off by trying to do DevOps. If you're going to transform your software development processes, the only reason you'd go through that much turmoil is because your current development processes aren't meeting the needs of your business. Start off with what are the inefficiencies in your current development processes that aren't meeting your business needs. The executives are in the best position to clarify exactly what that is and get the organization going down a continuous improvement process to meet that business objective. I think what most organizations will quickly find is DevOps has some key tools in the toolbox that they want to start using immediately to start taking some inefficiencies out of the development process. But don't go off to do DevOps and measure how well you did DevOps. We are all business executives. We run businesses. We manage businesses. We need to focus on what the business is trying to achieve and just use the tools that will best help that.
Okay. Where do we go next? DevOps has become a fairly popular concept now. It's getting a lot of attention. People understand it can have a very positive impact, but getting it in place isn't always easy. There's a lot of different spinning variables, culture, organization, management. Where in an enterprise that is looking to expand into Internet of Things, perhaps they're not doing that level of development and deployment, that they probably have been a bit more focused on enterprise applications rather than devices and embedded. How do you start up that capability and do it well? Within a software development organization, let's look at moving from traditional development to the Internet of Things development. What should we be keeping in mind?
I think one of the biggest things missing in the industry is, well, there's two approaches. One is if you have loosely coupled architectures like most of the unicorns do, then you can empower the teams and let them go that way. Most large enterprise organizations have more tightly coupled architectures that requires large numbers of people working together to develop and deliver things together. And I don't think those transformations are going to be effective until you find inspired executives that are willing to lead the transformation and work through the process. I've led a couple of successful transformations. If you look at the enterprise DevOps summit that Gene Kim led and got pulled together, what the common theme that you saw in most of those is the organizations that were making progress had an executive that was leading the charge and rallying the troops and making it happen, because it coordinates work across a large number of teams, and you need somebody who can look across the value chain and muster the resources to make the technical and the cultural changes that are required. But where a lot of my passion lies now, and the reason I wrote my second book, is I don't think there's a lot of resources for the executives to learn how to transform large organizations. And so I tried to capture everything that I knew about how best to do that in my second book, Leading the Transformation, Applying Agile and DevOps Principles at Scale. And hopefully that will be a resource that will enable people to go faster in the organization. And I think that's the next key lynch point, is getting the executives engaged to lead that change. And I think that's going to be the key to getting the adoption going much better and quicker.
All right, before we sign off, John, what about skills? It's one thing to get the top-down buy-in. It's one thing to recognize the need for transformation and put in some of the organizational building blocks, but ultimately you need to have the right people with the right skills. Any thoughts about how the Internet of Things will perhaps create demand for a certain set of skills, and how well are we in a position to train and find those people?
Well, it's Internet of Things and DevOps requires people to embrace skills and to understand much broader than their narrow silo. They'll need to develop an expertise in what they do, but they have to have the relationships. They have to have the ability to work across the organization to learn. One of the skills is learning and constantly learning as they go. This is not as Gary mentioned earlier, there's not a done for DevOps. It's a journey of learning. It's a journey of growing and getting better. Skills such as understanding process and understanding how are things working so you can continuously improve them is a skill that a lot of times people don't bring to the table. They know their piece, but they don't often think about the bigger picture. So it's a set of skills that's beyond a single technology. It's understanding that they're really not in IT. They really are part of the business. I love the way Gary said that earlier, and I agree with him. That seeing themselves as part of the business is a different mindset that they have to have as they go to work. And then as they apply their skills, they're focusing on how do they deliver business value. That's really the change.
Well, this is a tangent off of that we could probably go into another hour-long podcast on, but how do you do DevOps effectively when you're outsourcing a good part of your development? For embedded systems, you might look to an outside shop that has special experience in a particular area, but you still want to get DevOps. How does that work?
I think DevOps is key to making that work because especially if you have different vendors that you're outsourcing to, continuous integration, automated testing, continuous deployment is the forcing function that aligns the organization with working code across the system. When you're enabling people to go off and work on separate branches and separate issues and you have a late integration cycle or late in the process, that's where you get the dysfunctions with a bunch of different organizations coming together with stuff that doesn't work. If you force that to happen on a daily or multiple times a day basis, you get that system aligned and working well before people spend time and energy working on something that either won't work together or won't work well in production.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how continuous processes around development and deployment of applications is impacted and is a benefit to the Internet of Things. And I'd like to thank our guests. We've been here with Gary Groover, consultant, author, and former IT executives led large-scale transformation projects. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And we've been talking with John Jeremiah, technology evangelist at HP Software. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Dana. It's been fun.
And I'd also like to extend a big thank you to our audience for joining us for this DevOps and Internet of Things innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of HP-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening, and come back next time.